James Robertson is one of Scotland's most celebrated novelists. He's also a great lover, writer and collector of poetry. In this special event for the Scottish Poetry Library, James invites us round his back garden in rural Angus. He selected 6 poems for the whole Scots literary tradition that are most engaging for a younger audience. With 6 smashing poems and 2 good hot cups of tea, he sat down with me, Alistair Heather, to run through his choices. We begin with a reading.
Mrs. Nae Offence by Gregor Steele. We cry her Mrs. Nae Offence, that's what she likes to say, afore saying something awfy, then heading on her way. Nae offence, but see yon skirt ye bocht, it makes you look gey fat. Nae offence you like a standard lamp when you wear your new blue hat. Nae offence, but see your perfume, she whitters like a dew. It minds me o' they yellow cubes you get in a laddie's loo. Nae offence, but see your hairdo, you must have been a mug to fork out 20 quid for that, you look like a Pekingese dug. It fell upon my granny to put her in her place. Gran scalped her wi' a brolly, saying, Nae offence, but shut your face.
James, Mrs. Nae Offence, we asked you to wail for the whole kist of riches that is Scots bairns poetry, any of your favourites, and you decided to start with Mrs. Nae Offence. Tell us about how come that was so important to you.
Well, the reason really I chose it is because it's a funny poem. Every time I read it, it makes me laugh. And every time I've read it out in schools and classes, the bairns love it as well. Gregor Steele is himself a teacher, the man that wrote it, and you get a sense that he's tuned into what makes bairns laugh. So you've got this character, Mrs. Nae Offence. She's like any kind of old wifey that you might have bumped into in your past, who's always going to pick out and criticise you, whatever you do. Even if you're doing good things, she's going to find some way of picking out and saying, nah, I didn't like that.
Bringing you down a wee bit.
Bringing you down a wee bit, and she obviously is somebody that I always thinks that she's got a better take on how you should do things. So whatever you do, it's going to be wrong.
But then the good old hero granny coming along there at the end, does that resonate for your own bairnhood?
Yes and no. I mean, to be honest, you can think that the granny in other circumstances, she could also be a Mrs. Nae Offence. So you've got these twa wifeys, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but you know, they're kind of stereotypes in a way. But yes, there's the one that's always kind of wagging the finger, and then you've got your granny, who of course is everybody's hero. Everybody loves their granny, who comes along and sorts this wifey out. And it's just great. It's a funny story, and it's a story like so many poems that I've chosen. There's a story going on behind the poem, and that I really like. I like poems that have got a story in them.
Ah, it's a belter. I hadn't heard that until you brought it up for us. So that's actually for a collection that you yourself edited as part of Itchy Coo. So just tell us a wee bit about Itchy Coo.
Well, yeah, that's right enough. It comes from this book, Bletherton Braes, which is
available all good bookshops.
The subtitle of which is called Manky Mingin Rhymes for a Scottish Tune. And when my colleague Matthew Fitt and I were putting this together and editing it, what we wanted to do was create an imaginary Scottish tune that folk would actually recognise a wee bit of and say, oh, that's a wee bit like my tune. And so we then approached a number of different folk that we kent were good poets, good makers at writing in Scots, and said, right, invent characters that could live in this tune. And they sent in a whole range of wonderful poems, and Mrs. Nae Offence was one of them. And of course, as soon as we read that one, we had to use it.
No, of course. So with all this work with Itchy Coo that you've been doing, collecting various things, contributing your own poetry, there's some of your own stuff in there, how do you judge whether or no it's been a success?
The poem or the project? Well, you know, we set Itchy Coo up back in 2002, so it's been going for 17 years, 18 years now in fact. We've published 70 plus books, and a lot of them are aimed at, and particularly aimed at primary, but also at sort of younger secondary school pupils. And the idea is just to get them to encourage them to read, and also to speak out in their own Scots tongue. And I think it has been a success. I mean, we've a huge amount of Scots is now used in schools, particularly in primary schools. There's a great story that I can tell you about how I think it has worked. One of the poems in another book that I wrote is called Sergeant Snoddy. It's a poem about a daft police that goes on a wee adventure around Scotland. And I had written that many years ago, and one day I was at a party. It was actually a Burns night party in somebody's house, and there was a lassie there, maybe she was 7 or 8 years old, and she was saying that they'd been learning poems for Burns night. And I said, oh, that's great. She said, would you like to hear the one that I've learned off by heart? And I said, aye, that'd be great. So she recited, word for word, perfect, my poem, Sergeant Snoddy.
Amazing.
And
Amazing.
And I said at the end, and it was brilliant, and it's quite a long poem, but she'd done it, it was great. And I said, did you enjoy learning that? She says, oh, that was great. And I said, do you ken who wrote it? And she says, no. And I says, it was me. And she says, no. So we had the big argument about how could it possibly have been me? And eventually I persuaded her that it really was me. But to me, that encapsulated what we've been trying to do with Itchy Coo all these years. Because for a long time, around about Burns night, that was the only time for a long time in Scottish schools when you were really able to use Scots language in the classroom. And the teachers used to go and pull out all these old photocopies of very old and quite dated poems. And
story old stuff.
Story old stuff. And so we wanted to actually get a whole load of new poems written that were more contemporary, that bairns would say, oh, no, that's about me, that's about my pals, that's about my parents, my granny, the neighbours and all that kind of thing. And that story I've just told you, to me, is a beautiful example of that the process has actually worked. I don't care that that lassie didn't know who had written the poem. That's not the point.
Aye.
The point is that she loved the poem and she'd learned it off by heart, and that poem will stay with her for the rest of her days.
100%. It's better than any literary prize you can get. That's nailing. That's you doing what you're hoping to do. Now, our next poem that you've picked for us is another one that's based in schools. Listen to the Teacher.
Aye, that's in another book. Listen to the Teacher by Nancy Nicholson. He's 5-year-old, he's off to school, firm as bairn with a pencil and a rule. His teacher scoffs when he says, hoose. The word is house, you silly little goose. He tells his ma when he gets back, he saw a mouse in an old cart track. His father laughs for the stackyard dyke. Yon's a moose, you daft wee tyke. Listen to the teacher, dinna say dinny. Listen to the teacher, dinna say hoose. Listen to the teacher, you canna say monna. Listen to the teacher, you mauna say moose. He bit his lip and shut his mouth. Which one could he trust for truth? He took his burden o'er the hill to auld grey Geordie o' the mill. And did they mock thee for thy tongue, with them say auld and thou say young? They weren't making a fool of thee, making a fool of themselves, you see. Listen to the teacher, dinna say dinny. Listen to the teacher, dinna say hoose. Listen to the teacher, you canna say monna. Listen to the teacher, you mauna say moose. Say hoose to the father, house to the teacher, moose to the farmer, mouse to the preacher. When you're young, it's well for you to day and roam as Romans do. But when you grow and you're old, you needna day as you're told, nor trim your tongue to please yon dame that scorns the language o' her hame. Listen to the teacher, dinna say dinny. Listen to the teacher, dinna say hoose. Listen to the teacher, you canna say monna. Listen to the teacher, you mauna say moose. Then teacher thought that he was fine. He kept in step, he stayed in line. And father said that he was gran, spak his ain tongue like a man. And when he grew and made his choice, he chose his Scots, his native voice. And I charge ye today likewise, and spurn yon pair misguided cries. Listen to the teacher, dinna say dinny. Listen to the teacher, dinna say hoose. Listen to the teacher, you canna say monna. Listen to the teacher, you mauna say moose. again, it's a great poem for reading out loud. It's by a woman called Nancy Nicholson, who was a teacher herself. She grew up in Caithness, but has moved around the country a lot as well. So there's a wee bit of Caithness accent in that poem in the middle when the narrator the bairn goes to Geordie o' the Mill. But yeah, to me that's a great poem because it totally captures that idea that sometimes Scots isn't allowed everywhere. You know, sometimes you're told, oh, didn't speak like that. You know, didn't speak like that to the teacher. Didn't speak like that when you're trying to get a job and so on. And the poem challenges that quite subtly and says, well, all right, maybe you need to learn that there's times when it's perfectly all right to say hoose rather than house, and there's other times when maybe you need to say house. So it's a kind of interesting poem, but fundamentally it comes down on the side of, but stick to your Scots, you know, and when you're old enough and you've got the choice, make the choice to use your Scots tongue.
That's an absolute smashing poem. It's in that I can really that resonates with me as well. There's something about that Scots as a kind of rebellious tongue for a lot of folk. But you've said actually a lot of the work you've been doing in schools has been no just good for bairns, eh?
Oh, absolutely not. It's about teachers as well, because you have to mind that teachers themselves went through an education system, and you know they're a wee bit older, and so often they were told, no, you didn't use the words in the classroom. So they themselves have had to kind of rethink what they actually think about Scots as a language. I mean, I've lost count of the number of times that teachers have said to me or to Matthew that they've given us permission to use Scots in the classroom, which seems a bizarre thing. And it shouldn't be like that. Nobody should have to have permission to use their own tongue. But that's the strange relationship that Scots and English have sometimes had, that there's been a sort of a slightly a kind of hierarchy of language, if you like. You know, that English has been regarded as the language of education, and it's the official language, and that's the one you speak when you're in certain circumstances. Whereas Scots has been the one that you can use in the playground or at home or on the street when you're with your pals, and that's true, of course, that we're all good at switching from one kind of register to another. Aye. But at the same time, I feel, and Matthew feels, and I think that's what we've tried to do with Itchy Coo, we feel that actually Scots should begin to ease up and should have more value placed on it than maybe it's had sometimes in the past.
Aye, so the teacher doesn't come over that well in the poem there, but in real life, your experience, these teachers are folk that have been through that same kind of damaging education system and just need help. That actually, no, it's fine. Here's the good materials.
And you know, again, my view is that what education is about when it comes to language is it's about teaching bairns and giving them confidence and enthusiasm to be as articulate as they can be in the language that they're using. And that doesn't matter whether it's Scots or English or French or Polish or Spanish. That's what, you know, language is about communication. And so you want folk to be able to read, write and speak the language, whatever it is, Scots or English or anything else, as well as they possibly can. That, to me, is what education is about.
Absolutely. Now, me and you, James, we're haying this blether so the young guns out there get to kind of bit of the smashing poetry that exists in Scots. But there might be folk older than 18 watching this, and we can't stop them. So what would you say to only parents or kind of folk that are now in their middle years in Scotland and come through the education system thinking, oh, Scots is a bit rough, I better no use it, I better just stick to my English?
I would encourage them to explore the huge wealth of literature, poems and prose that's written in Scots, because they might be surprised at what they find. But also I would say, didn't fash about it. You know, it's all right. It's perfectly acceptable to use Scots or English, whichever you feel most comfortable with, but don't suppress one in favour of the other. And you know, again, I think with older folk, sometimes that's difficult to unlearn those kind of behaviours. But you know, nobody's going to jump down your throat these days if you speak a wee bit, if you speak good Scots. And in fact, the more Scots that you speak, and the more Scots that other folk speak, the more confident everybody can become with that.
Well put. Now, we've been dealing with both poems we've had so far have been modern, they've been pretty recent, they've been dealing with the here and now. We're going to look back 100 years, back to the Scots language renaissance, to the kind of 1920s time, and you're going to take us out to a poem called the Gauk. So let's hear that to start with, and we'll get a blether about it.
Okay. The Gauk by William Soutar. Half down the hill, where fa's the linn, far frae the flocht of folk, I saw upon a lanely whin, a lanely singing Gauk. Cuckoo, cuckoo, and at my back the howie hill stood up and spak. Cuckoo, cuckoo. There was nae soon, the loupin linn hung frostit in its fa. Nae bird was on the lanely whin, sae white wi' floors of snaw. Cuckoo, cuckoo, I stood staying still, and softly spak the howie hill. Cuckoo, cuckoo.
The Gauk. A smashing poem. I really enjoyed the sound of it, but truth be told, it didn't really ken what it was about. Can you break that down for me a wee bit?
Well, William Soutar was a wonderful poet that was writing in the 1920s, 30s, 40s. It was a real shame, actually. He developed a disease in his spine, which meant that for most of his adult life he was confined to his bed. He stayed with his mum and dad in Perth because he was a Perth loon, and his father was a joiner, and he redesigned the entire bedroom so that Willie Soutar could sit up in his bed and look out the window at the garden and everything else that was going on outside, and folk used to come and visit him and so on. But it was pretty tough to be in your bed like that for all these years. But the way that he sort of overcame that was to write. He wrote loads of poems in Scots and English, loads of bairn rhymes, and the Gauk is one of these. Now the Gauk, it's a short poem, but it's a mysterious poem. It's no easy to, you need to read it 2 or 3 times before you begin to get into it. And to be honest, there's still a bit of mystery. I ken this poem really well, but there's still a wee bit of mystery to it, to me as well. The Gauk is the Scots word for a cuckoo, the bird, but it's also got the other meaning that cuckoo has in English of somebody who's a wee bit foolish. So a Gauk is a fool. And the person, whoever it is that's telling that poem, again, there's a wee story in there. You kind of wondered, all right, they're listening to the Gauk in this beautiful landscape. And first of all, the first verse is about hearing the cuckoo in summer, and then the second verse is about hearing the cuckoo again in winter. But you didn't get cuckoos in winter. So is that a kind of echo of the summer experience? Aye. And there's this beautiful language going on about a flocht of folk, which is a kind of stream of busy people, and a linn, which is a waterfall. And the linn in the winter is frosted with snow, with floors of snow. It's a beautiful image. But I think what's going on in this poem is that the Gauk isn't just the cuckoo. The Gauk, to some extent, is the person that's telling the poem. And that maybe they've been fooled in some way. They're going to this place at 2 different times of the year and they still hear the cuckoo, even though the cuckoo is no longer there. Maybe. But I think poems can be mysterious and you didn't have to understand them straight away. I mean, as I said, I've kept that poem for 30, 40 years. And every time I go back to it, I kind of get a wee thrill out of the mystery of it.
Aye, you're absolutely right. Maybe I need to let myself just be mysterious by it a wee bit. I don't think you have to always understand every single word of every single poem, and that one works at a kind of different level, I think. So the next scene, which is written by Robert Geary in Willie Soutar's contemporaries 100 years ago, it's way more accessible. It's so vibrant and it just grabs a hoddy and takes you for a jaunt. So let's get into Football in the Street. Okay. I'll give this a blast and then we'll talk about it after. Exactly. Football in the Street by Robert Garriach. Shock! Here's the police, the Gayfield police, and they'll put us in the nick for playing football in the street. One of them's a 40, like a muckle fosy totty, but the other's lang and skinny like with umbrella feet. Ach, awa, says Tammy Curtis, for they're baith our blate to hurt us. They're a glaikit pair of chichters and as healand as a peat. Sure, they're coming with the hurdy-gurdy woman that we cape it with our puggy playing football in the street. Say we're off by cocky dudgeons and the sandies and the cowp, and we're over a dozen fences that the coppers cannae loup, and we're in and out of back greens and we're dreeping muckle dykes and we tear our clays on railings full of nesty iron spikes. And all the time the skinny linkies cop is at our heels, though the 40s deed their deeing, this shit seems to run on wheels.
Now he's stick it on a railing, with his helmet on a spike, now he's up an hour and running, did you ever see the like? But we stood a Watty Puddicky, that's down by Logie Green, and we're round by Beaver Hall, where deal a beavers ever seen. Now we're off with boots and stockings, and we're wading round a fence that sticks you into the water, but that's nothing if you've sense. Syne we cushy down together, just like chookies with a hen, in a bonny wee bit bunky hole that bobbies dinna ken. But my knees is skint and bleeding, and my breeks, they want the seat. Jings, you get there nor you're after playing football in the street.
Excellent.
Okay.
That's a cracking poem. It just, like, it absolutely bringes off the page, like, takes you for this, like, you really feel that rhythm through it and all that. Tell us about how come you enjoyed that so much.
For that reason, you can't stop sort of rushing along when you're reading that poem. It cries out to be read out loud as well, I think. It's got brilliant tight rhythms to it. And as you read it, you feel like you're actually one of the laddies being chased by the police. Robert Garrick, or Robert Geary as he's sometimes pronounced, he grew up in Edinburgh in the early part of the 20th century, and he particularly knew North Edinburgh from sort of the Broughton area down to the water of Leith, and then right down to the shore at Granton. He knew that area really well. So if you ken Edinburgh, there's a lot of local references in there to things like the Gayfield Police. That's the police station at Gayfield Square, which is still there. And then there's other wee bits where they go, where the laddies go running away to get away from when they're being chased by the police. But you didn't have to ken Edinburgh to still get right into the rhythm of it. And apparently Robert Geary, when he was a student at Edinburgh University, he and his fellow students were all writing kind of formal English poems, and he suddenly thought, I'm going to try and write something in the speak that I grew up with, as I was on the streets myself as a bairn, and that's what he came up with.
So I hate to ask, our first poem was Mrs. No Offence, her getting put in her place. Then it was the teachers being gied a bit of a doing. Now here's the police getting shown up. Is there a wee bit of anti-authoritarianism in your selection, or is that just is that more to do with you, or more to do with the tradition?
Maybe I kind of empathise with folk that are prepared to stand up a wee bit to authority. Maybe that's part of it. But I think there's something in I think maybe that comes back down to the relationship that Scots sometimes has with English as well. There's a kind of a sense that sometimes Scots is a wee bit less formal and is going to kick against being told what to do. And in that poem, these laddies, they're going, we'll be all right. And then the skinny malinky police, who's obviously quite quick on his feet, is catching up with them, and that gives them a flag. And then they're running a war, trying to hide and get away, but they can't wait to get away from him. So in the end, they outrun him and they outpace him, but they pay for it because their breeks are torn and they've skinned their knees and all the rest of it. So, rebellion doesn't come without a cost.
Our next dean takes us right to what mony see as a real bastion of Scots, the hame. Like right back into the bairnhood. It's something Abdi will recognise, that kind of intergenerational conflict we've seen already in some of the other poems. So can you give us your next selection, please?
Okay, this is a poem by Janet Paisley, and it's a kind of monologue, and it's just called Sarah, Fed Up. See my mammy, says eat your dinner, gives me cabbage. See my granny, says the Wayne will not eat that, leave it in, gives me chocolate. See my daddy, says I've got to clear my plate, dinna like that greasy gravy, stain called totties. See my granda, says the bairn's no got a stomach like a coo, gives me licorice, pan drops, chews, ate them all. Feel sick now.
Sarah Fed Up. Janet Paisley, of course, is a contemporary of yours. She's been writing for many years, unfortunately passed away relatively recently. She's got a lot of different challenging parts to her poetry, but you've picked it in there that just so easy to resonate with.
Janet was a good friend. I learned a lot about writing generally for her. She wrote lots and lots of things. She wrote plays, poems, film scripts, novels, short stories, and she used a lot of Scots. And sometimes she wrote entirely in Scots. And she really she grew up. She stayed in Falkirk nearly all her days, and she really resonated. That particular kind of central Scotland Scots is what she wrote in, and it resonates all the way through. But you're right. She wrote challenging things. She wrote both for adults and for bairns. And one of the things that she was best at was getting inside somebody's head and inhabiting them, and then producing these. I mean, Sarah Fed Up is one of a series of monologues, and under the general title "You Cannae Win." And in this one, I think I've heard her performing that, and she almost becomes the wee lassie as she was reciting that poem. And does all the kind of, I can't do it nearly as well as she used to do it. But you kind of felt, I'm in the presence of this wee lassie that's eating our muckle chocolate. But it's great. And as you say, there's all that intergenerational kind of conflict, and the lassie to some extent playing her granny off against her ma, and her granda off against her daw, and all that kind of thing. It's just great stuff.
Aye, 100%. Like you say, poetry, and that quality of poetry in particular, although it's dead simple and doesn't seem to be doing much, it completely takes you to a different time and a different place and into a different heat. And you're right, it looks simple, but that's hard today, and she's stripped it right down to the basics. It's also, that's the only poem of all the ones that I've chosen that doesn't have rhyme in it. I mean, not a regular rhyme in it. And that, again, that's quite hard to pull off, but she does it really well, and it feels to me like it is a poem, although, of course, at another level, it's just somebody actually saying what they're thinking. But to me, she does it beautifully, and I doubt very much that there's more than about 100 words in that poem. It's impressive. And again, that's a dead modern een. It's relatively recent, published in You Cannae Win in our anthologies. So the last een, our final poem for this wee selection you've prepared for us, takes us back a long time. Nobody kens how old this een is. That's how old it is. And it's awfully gruesome compared to a lot of the stuff we've had. So you're now going to give us a reading of the Twa Corbies. Okay, here we go. The Twa Corbies, and as you said, I can't say who it's written by because we didn't ken. The Twa Corbies. As I was walking all alone, I heard Twa Corbies making a main. The tane unto the t'other say, where shall we gang and dine the day? In a hint yon auld failed dyke, I wot there lies a new slain knight, and naebody kens that he lies there but his hawk, his hound, and his lady fair. His hound is to the hunting gane, his hawk to fetch the wild fowl hame, his lady's ta'en another mate, sae we may mak our dinner sweet. He'll sit on his white haw's bane, and I'll pike out his bonny blue een. Wi' ae lock o' his gowden hair, we'll theek our nest when it grows bare. Mony a yen for him maks main, but nane sall ken where he is gane. Ower his white banes, when they are bare, the wind sall blaw for evermore. Aye, the Twa Corbies, it's a bit gruesome. It is. But I think that's all right. Most of the poems that I've chosen are a wee bit lighter in mood, but that one's dark. And there's all kinds of macabre things going on. There's the Corbies sitting on the collar bane of the poor dead knight and piking his eyes out. They're taking bits of his hair away to theek their nest, to thatch their nest with. But also it seems as though there's been murder done, because the only folk that ken where this knight's body is lying are his hound and his hawk and his lady fair, and the lady seems to have gone off and found somebody else to bide with. So what is going on there? Has murder been done? We don't get all the answers to that, but I think that's great to have a bit of gruesomeness and so on in a poem. And to be perfectly honest, I think older bairns will actually find that quite exciting. Oh, aye. I mean, it gave me the heebie-jeebies when I first read it, that's for sure. So this is, the Twa Corbies is both works as a poem, but it's also commonly a sang.
Aye, well, it would have started off as a sang. I mean, you know, we don't ken exactly how old it is, but it's 400 or 500 years old, maybe a wee bit older even. And in these days, folk didn't write things down. They learned them as songs and recited them. And that one's a short one, but it's one of hundreds and hundreds of ballads that we hear from that period. And they were originally songs, and that particular ballad, there's great versions that you can find on social media by bands like Old Blind Dogs and things like that. There's any number of different versions of them, and they're worth listening to because you get a different take when you hear a different singer or band singing them. But I think one of the reasons why I wanted that poem in this selection is because it connects all the modern stuff right back to this long tradition that we have of brilliant writing in Scots. Songs, poems, stories, they're all connected up and they're connected by the language. And I think that once folk get their heads into that, they discover what they very often didn't ken at all, is that there is this massive repository of great work in Scots that's there for them to explore, and there's loads of it about if you go and look for it.
James, thank you so much for giving us this introduction to the whole world of Scots poetry that's, I suppose it's like with a younger audience in mind, but Abdi can enjoy these works.
Abdi can enjoy it, and the thing is, once you get your mind into it and you begin to explore it, you never stop. And I've been reading these poems and others like them for now 40, 50 years maybe, and there's no end to it. So once you get the bug, you'll hate it for the rest of your days.